First time in the depth that I've never really shared it before. Today I'm going to add on something which I've never shared publicly before that I will be discussing in my live stream later tonight if I can get a window of 2 hours to actually make the presentation that you would have been seeing had my car not broken down yesterday. Okay, but we'll start off with this, which is a presentation I gave to the ISCF 25 in Szczecin in Poland in 2023. And it was called Practical Applications of Fractal Toroidal Moment because everyone wants to understand whether there's any actual practical use to anything you're ever doing. So I start with a whole presentation talking about practical use. On the right there you see a detail that I took in the British Museum on the Assyrian stele at Shamshi Adad from about 814 BC. So this is some of our experiments going on in Holland, my friend Henk Jurjen. And you see these what are called plasma tufts going on here. This is the anode, the cathode is the chamber. This is a coherent matter wave beam. It's a helical beam that's coming off an exploded ball of lightning, and it comes out of a particular structure on the fractal structure. And this is Martin Fleischmann, and I've been volunteering for the Martin Fleischmann project since I helped set it up in 2012. And this is a statement that he gave to in an interview to a guy called Christopher P. Tinsley in 1996. He says, as I told you when we were talking before, we had about four projects which we were working towards. One was to do with gravitation. One was actually to do with behavior of electrons in metals. We actually started to collect equipment together to investigate the behavior of electrons in metals. The one everyone knows him for is cold fusion, but one of the projects was gravitation. So Winston Bostick was charged to do Project Sherwood in 1948, which was convert the nuclear bomb / fusion bomb into domestic fusion ultimately. And by 1957 he published that what he had found, which he calls plasmoids, which we know as plasma toroids, he said that could be the basis for the structure of all matter from subatomic to the formation of galaxies. Read it and weep. From subatomic, this is going to become important, to the formation of galaxies. And these things can move at 450,000 miles an hour. And they are a basis of a NASA technology developed by Richard Eskridge for a propulsion technology. Anyway, what did he do? He took deuterated titanium, pulsed electric discharge, produced a plasma loop, and that does a magnetic reconnection. Two of these at least firing together. This is 8 coming together, and this produces a loop, which is a tor of tori. Now, this is Tom Bearden. I'm not going to play this. This is the conclusion of the book published in 1987 that my discussion of Ken Shoulders forced out into the public from its secret state. And he was studying the guy that produced these samples here, John Hutchison, an autistic agoraphobic from from Vancouver in Canada. And in the conclusion, he basically describes Yakov's Anapole, where there is no electrical magnetic fields, but there are vector and scalar potentials that propagate outside. And he says that this phase-determined force-free world will certainly be another chapter somewhere in the future. There appears to be an incredibly large number of useful phenomena yet to arise from using the potential effects that are not immediately accessible to E and B fields. This is a discussion in 2016 in Nature Materials. This is a diagram of that thing there, and they're saying, we don't understand it. This is decades later, right?
So the E is the electric and B is magnetic?
So what you have here, you have an electric dipole,
yep.
And here you have a ring where you've got an oscillating electric current which produces an oscillating magnetic field.
Yep.
So the oscillating magnetic field in the loop and the oscillating dipole produces phase cancellation at what's called the non-radiating boundary. Mm-hmm. And only vector and scalar potentials propagate out from that. Now, I'll let Tom Bearden speak here.
Also, there's one other thing we must say about that. There is emerging in the last few years, and has emerged in orthodox science at an advanced level, what I would say is the very beginning, but it's moving pretty fast, theory of force-free fields. And these are getting very close to what Tesla was doing. They haven't added the anti-wave back in yet, but they're getting close. at least they're eliminating the overall force and doing something else with the electromagnetics that remains.
So, this is my good friend and sadly departed colleague Neil Crichton Gold, and he conducted an experiment that I proposed in 2013. He was the first person to do it in June 2017, and he sent me the reactor because I had protected the identities of several other people that had worked with the project. And he then, under analysis of the reactor outside of the crust, inside there we have diamond, nickel, and deuteroxide, heavy water, okay? And outside of the crust, we saw a 2-order structure with 2 spots in the middle, a 3-order structure. We saw a 4-order structure and a 5-order structure.
So, sorry,
It's got a beam coming here and a beam coming here. It's got
Yeah.
3 beams here. There's 4 beams here on this one, and there's 5 on that one.
And what is this, the reactor?
We called it the line reactor because he called it the line reactor. It turns out that he grew up in Kenya, so he liked to think about things in the terms of a line.
Sorry, I'm just unfamiliar with like what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
What exactly are we seeing? Like, is this just a microscopic?
This is
hole?
an SEM, and a elemental map
Okay.
of what is on this point of the broken crust.
Okay.
What happened was in this reactor, when he turned it off, he then attached to this bolt over here, and bearing in mind this was in a piece of fused quartz, there was no direct electrical connection to it. He attached a wire to here, and then the other end of the wire went to a sink, not a ground, but a sink, which I believe, because I got his effects after he died, and I'd speculated before, was a large lump of metal, right? And it turns out in his apartment, he had large grounding copper rods and large grounding aluminium rods, right? He never admitted because he wanted to keep that for the Cavendish lab as a secret, but he died with his secret. But my projection was, I think this is what it is. And he put it across a 20-watt bulb and it lit, 30-watt bulb and it lit it for 20 minutes.
Oh wow.
So something in here was storing something that became electrons. And when that happened, he heard a sucking sound, like that. And he then heard a crackling sound. And it was all fragmented like this, the copper oxides that were formed. And it's in those copper oxides that we found these structures. Okay? And what that is there's clusters of coherent electrons in here. I'm giving you the quick end of the story. That when you disrupt them, they break up into ordinary electrons. This is the basis of cold electricity of Tesla and anyone who thinks they've discovered it since. And it lit that light bulb for that period of time. This is how you can transmit a large amount of power along an 8-micron wire like the Russians did during the Soviet energetics program. So I did one experiment when I was at school, and it was a hydrodynamic experiment. It was how fast can different bowl shapes go through a big body of water. Right, that was at A level. And I did nothing with hydrodynamics until I went to a lab in Mumbai in 2017, and he showed me this large cylinder here with these 19.46 kilohertz ultrasound devices here, and this is a hollow cylinder. It produces a helical sound wave down it, and I videoed with my cameras that I had available with me at the time because I didn't know what I was going to see, and I saw these solitons with their own wave function on them and vortical spiral beams coming in at regular distances, right? So something is creating a vortex that comes into here and feeds into this energy structure, and it's regularly spaced around an overall soliton vortex.
What's a soliton again?
A soliton is a solitary wave.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is what you might know of, a smoke ring. Okay? This is a smoke ring because it's highly stable. You can eject, you don't need a tall chimney, you can eject the smoke from the power station high up into the air. This is a smoke ring where, from alien scientists' work, he passes a laser through it so you can see the flow pattern. So it's the same as that, except you've got a laser cutting it in half. And you can see there's a high density of the smoke inside the torus of the ring. So it's taking material. Now what is happening here? It's weird. Some material is going straight off in these angles, and some of it is going through, but is it going through or is that something coming in here? What's happening here with the laser? That's very interesting. But these go very stably in this direction. They maintain their coherence. Now this is the most important of these. These images were also captured in that very same bubble tank in 2017. But what's happening here is you've got a vortex and an anti-vortex, right? And over here, this is, what you're looking at is I'm shining a light at it. And everywhere you see white is where it's low pressure. And bubbles are coming out of dissolved solution and they are reflecting the light. How is it possible that all of that is low pressure? Where's the pressure going? Right? It's free floating body and it's all low pressure. Somewhere must be condensing something. And then also you have two beams that come down here. They kind of focus to a point here, and it's got something that shoots things in. So you can have one that will accelerate into another one. Maybe I can show you. Oh no, I've turned those off. Okay, so this is how you make it. We don't need to go into that. Okay, this is important. Okay. This is on a Shakhparov generator. This is a Shakhparov generator during Soviet energetics. What is it? It's a Mobius strip. A Mobius strip is energized with radio frequency in a certain way, and then they put a pulse of mains through it, like that. And what it has on that Mobius strip, if you can imagine it, it has a copper conductor that goes around there, and it's because it's only got one side, it goes round and comes back on itself. Okay? This is a zero albedo structure produced at a distance. This is a yin structure. Okay, this is called single bar thermal extraction. Energy is extracted, all forms of energy are extracted at this point and brought to here. This is a yang structure, matter is destroyed here and the energy is projected out here. These are your fake UFOs, right?
What is albedo?
It basically doesn't reflect light, it absorbs it, it has no emissions.
Okay.
Yeah?
It's referencing the first step of the alchemical process.
You can see a fractal nodes on here as well. So what is this? This was a simulation done in a replication of that work using early Tesla computers. This is the shock wave of the point of the electrical being applied, and these are the shock waves. And what you've got is a mushroom shape with a vortex and an anti-vortex in the charge field arrangement with black with white on the outside, and this is white with black, right? So you've got a yin-yang in a yang structure and a yang-yin in a yin structure, right? And these are moved and they're propagating around. This is the exact same structure in so-called spectacle brooches hundreds of years before Christ was born in Helsinki in Finland. This is the flux loop between the monopole and the counterpole. So what is a phase singularity? The phase singularity is what causes this. It's like the Penrose staircase goes around one way, goes around the other way. You look like you're going up, you're staying in place. You look like you're going down, you're staying in place. And a Mobius strip has that, but so does a torus soliton. So this leads me to the toroidal moment. I've talked about an electric dipole, a magnetic dipole. If you have a current loop, you get a magnetic moment. If you have these and you rotate them 90 degrees, you get 1, 2, 3, 4. You only need 2, but let's say we've got 4. This produces the first order toroidal moment. If you take that structure and rotate it with the toroidal moment, you get a second order toroidal moment. This is an N-level toroidal moment. It was discovered by Deriving in 1965 and published in his thesis in 1967. So here's the basic structure. This is from Science. And that paper, and this is copper, 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 oxygen, current loop, current counter loop in copper. That is a toroidal moment according to that paper. Okay, that's theoretical. I've done some maths. This is a toroidal moment structure in the Lion reactor. This is a large toroidal moment, fractal toroidal moment structure, consuming matter in this shape. Okay. So that's your basic vortex, anti-vortex producing.
Well, when you say it consumes matter,
Are we going to get?
Okay, cool.
So, from this work and from what I saw in the hydrodynamics, I had one of my moments that I was talking about earlier in the day, where I get high level of heartbeat goes up, my temperature goes up, I start sweating, I have to get out of bed and I sketch it down. So this was in January 2018. My wife knows what I do when I go through these things. And I said, there has to be something that's extracting things in, pulling things into a vortex which stays there. There's some sort of flux flow that goes around here, and this is a helical wave that goes around here. That had to be the structure that produced this, because this reactor did not go over 1050 degrees C, which is below the melting point of copper oxide, yet it's fluidized this copper oxide and twisted it over there. It's also got a material that's disappeared in the core, and then it has these two asymmetric wings, very important. This is amasa gas, which is a form of HHO. In 2019, I did an experiment in Japan. Amasa gas, about 10 seconds, you can watch the video of it actually happening. It's on the MFMP's YouTube channel, at MFMP. Put it on the tungsten welding rod, you see a bright glow. It looks like it's disintegrating. They call it vaporizing, it wasn't. We determined that the temperature was below the temperature at which tungsten even oxidizes by using a bolometer. But we saw transmuted products, all of the elements in your body, instantaneously being produced on the rod. And also, I asked the world's expert in ball lightning to hold a vacuum cleaner and put a face mask on it in 2019 before they became fashionable, right? And they sucked in the fumes, and what you saw in there were the chunks of tungsten with the same transmuted material in there. So this was not melting, it was not turning to a gas, it was disintegrating, right? But this structure was on there, okay? This structure, and you'll see that this is exactly the sacred geometry structure. We have a curved line that comes into this one. This one is on top of this one. This is exactly how it works. And the stuff that comes in this side, but there's also stuff that goes in here and comes out here. You see this helical wave coming out of here? That's the coherent matter wave that I showed you on the first slide. That comes out of the structure of the ball lightning. Now, this is strontium, not exist in the original material. This is a carbon film, does not exist in the original material.
Are you saying this was fused together to form strontium?
You're going to find out what's happening.
Okay, sorry.
Strontium is lighter than tungsten.
Oh, okay.
In fact, every single element there is lighter than tungsten. Every single element. This is the heaviest one other than tungsten that you see. Carbon, and you've got potassium, you've got iron, you've got calcium, you've got literally everything that's in your body. So, this is our hydrodynamic vortex. Vortex, counter vortex. This part from there to there and that part to there is chi, right? This here is the Vesica Pisces, the first symbol of the Christian church. This is chi, and through here is torsional flow with density, rho. Chi rho, chi rho, Christos. This was on the this was on the Macedonian coins 300 years before Christ was born. When they wrote the Bible, they go, oh, this guy knows what's up, we'll give him the name Christ. Chi rho. It's the hydrodynamic vortex, but it's a magnetohydrodynamic vortex. So this is in free fluid. When I saw this, my mind was utterly blown, because what you're looking at there is a depressurization event of that water there and everywhere. And look at these two things that come down. They come down on the owl nose. They come down on the golden ratio lines. Right? That is in aluminium. Oh, there's a touch screen. That's cool. Excellent. This is on aluminium. Notice the asymmetry. One is above the other. This is what we were talking about, the reality of how nature builds things. Within this circle where the material is coming up in a wavy line, this is twisting over, remember. This is twisting over, this is twisting over, this is twisting over. You've got a central line and it comes up to there. You've got a central line, it goes wave to wave and comes into there. This, by the way, is the Om with the thing over here because the material's on one side, right? But it's also precisely and exactly the yin-yang. Precisely and exactly the yin-yang, the creator. This, precisely and correctly, this is an aluminium foil done in 2021 in August. You have a cone with a pit, and here you have a pit with a cone. On this side, inside the golden ratio line, inside the Vesica Pisces, you have a magatama, the Holy Spirit thing, according to the Japanese, where you can create anything. You can create gods from them, right? This is the yang side. There is no calcium there. The aluminium has had oxygen torn from it, leaving crystals of boron. It's gone through a wormhole and it comes out here. This is exactly the same as a galaxy shape, precisely, just as Winston Bostick said in 1957, having run Project Sherwood for the US Department of Energy, right? And inside the golden ratio, inside the golden ratio line, inside the Vesica Pisces, you have this structure here, which has calcium in there, which is, some isotopes are aluminium plus oxygen. Oxygen has been ripped from the aluminium there, and it's been brought round and fused in there. This is the yang side, taking matter apart, giving it to the ultimate destroyer, the yin, which creates new matter. Now, this is a plasma structure in a ball lightning reactor we have. It's being replicated here in Czech Republic with Jan Rak, and he will be part of the conference. We'll do real-time, everyone can see it, they can bring their own materials, transmutation experiments you can witness and see under the SEM in minutes, right? At the top here, it goes in the top and it comes out to the bottom. This is the caduceus, one of the oldest symbols known from Sumeria. So this is the 2D structure. I worked out the 3D structure from a very small one, but forget that, we don't need 4 levels. This is a torus with a peak in the middle, and this is a torus with a hole, right? You've got a yin and yang there. Now you take that quantization level, you rotate it 90 degrees. This is the same structure, it's like an apple core. Get an apple, eat it, that's the apple core. I'm looking at it from top down plan view, I'm looking at quarter on, there's the apple core, you can see it coming out there. This has those rotated and gone round there. This one has that one rotated in here. There's 48 divisions. Okay? So that has a wheel within a wheel within a wheel. I derived this structure, and that was, by the way, on a John Hutchison sample. John Hutchison worked. So Hal Puthoff gets a CIA funding through a chicken guy, right? In my view, as a cutout, CIA cutout, pays Ken Shoulders, who invented the quadrupole mesh spectrometry and is the father of microelectronics. You have computers, phones, televisions, and everything because of this guy. He then spent most of the rest of his life investigating John Hutchison, right?
Is Hutchinson the guy who he did like a bunch of videos in the 90s?
Yeah,
like
I speak to him daily. I'm writing his biography, and I've got many of his samples, some of which you see on the table.
Okay, yeah, right.
It's a real thing, it works, right? I came up with this, a wheel within a wheel within a wheel. And this is self-similar to the whole. So you've got to imagine in your mind that that can be like that. And I said, this is the structure of space-time. And it wasn't until I said earlier, I read the 1995 paper in 2022, 2 years after I published this, actually more than 2 years, that it specifically said that based on the Soviet energetics program, that last part of the Soviet energetics program, he was saying, I have one of these coils actually made in the lab, and it's a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, at least minimally to be stable. So here, then, we find the impact marks on reactors. This is the anode sheath in the kind of reactor you saw in the first slide there. And when we produce a ball lightning, sometimes it becomes destabilized and it comes and slams into the fused quartz. 6-point structure, 4-point structure, multi-point structure. Right, depends on the level of time it's baking. And here, you'll see the full impact structure. In the center, it has a copper slug where it's ripped copper out of the copper pipe it was born in. It's got that spinning around the outside of the core core here. Then it has the apple around there. This is the non-radiating boundary, and these are self-similar structures which also have a toroidal moment that want to join the Borg. Here is the overall structure. You can see it exactly and precisely fits. Nature has one answer. You cannot improve on it. Anything different from this is going to make your life harder. Anything. So then we found the physical structures collapsed from the coherent matter wave functions. Copper is diamagnetic, carbon is diamagnetic, so they orbit around these structures. This is calcium and oxygen always. In the core, it produces something else, which you're going to see in a minute. This is the reactor that produced it. It's 2 brass sheets on top of another brass sheet this way. When he took this thing apart, which was just serendipity, it'd never been done before. No one were building electrodes by stacking metal on top of each other. It turns out there were these wormholes. And because they are arranged in the way they are, it had to be a magnetic fluid. So the electrons had become fluidized, just as Ken Shoulders said. And they'd bled between the channels and they'd bored out these channels. And on the boundary around here we see these collapsed wave functions of the overall fractal toroidal structures. Then I sent that, which I'd done in 2018 in a flight of fancy in my brain. That, which I saw derived from Hutchison sample in 2020, that was the very first one I saw on the train home looking at the video recording of the SEM session. I sent those 3 images to the Russians that I work with, and they just sent immediately, someone I'd never spoken to before, sent back this paper from Schwerblis from 1995. And that was the front image of this paper called Bagel Game. And in it he says, the Cold War's ended, Soviet Russia's ended, what they're going to do to me? It was classified, but come on, bring it on. Basically, that's the opening kind of part of the paper. And in there, he describes a current structure producing a magnetic field. Magnetic fields rotated 90 degrees, linking together, producing an E field. Rotate that, that's a wheel within a wheel within a wheel structure. Now, it isn't actually at this level an electric field again, it's a toroidal moment. But whatever, that's actually how I described it in my 2020 video, right? Because that's how I didn't know about the toroidal moment then. So, in this particular sample, which in this case was an iron plate and an iron plate with 3 copper tubes in between and some zinc plate to get the action going, because it produces zinc oxide, which is pyroelectric and piezoelectric, and copper oxide is photoelectric. You have all of the electrics throwing electrons out to become those fluidized electrons. We saw on this boundary of this, and you see it in the reactor, there's another iron plate here, rotate that round, look at the camera down there, you see this hemispherical ball appear, disappears, all of the copper in that area is completely disappeared. Where's it gone to? Not there anymore, right? And you can see how sharp this piece of copper is, which was directly in contact with the iron. Why did this material here completely disappear? And that very sharp piece of copper, one of the most thermally conductive materials known to man, is perfectly there, right? Well, on this boundary here, just here, I'm looking at it here, you see a 2-order structure with a Paisley, the first symbol of a monoatheistic religion, the Zoroastrianism. A 3-order structure with a Paisley. A 4-order structure, oh my God, it's got a square hole in a square hole and no Paisley. 5 with a twist in it, 6 with an actual round hole, 8 with substructures starting to form in the core. That is a 2-order structure with your beams that project through the non-radiating boundary. But I will show you a better image in a while. If you can imagine that whole structure is fractally here, the non-radiating boundaries intersect, and so then these things cannot go out of the overall structure. And that is why the swastika or the Maltese cross, both on the Nazi flag, right, are the symbol of God-controlled power, as on the same Sumerian stele around the neck as the symbol of God-controlled power. But Nardi and Bostic, 1980, the end of Project Sherwood. Toroid with spokes. D4D structure, exactly the same as this 1914 patent. D4D structure. This, by the way, the actual wooden chamber, the wooden tower, is the Sothic triangle. So, this paper is a replication of work done in 1973 in Japan. They fired a laser into plasma. This is in 2021, funded by most of planet Earth. Fire a laser into nonlinear plasma, 1.36 thousand Teslas in that loop, and also 1.36 thousand Teslas comes to a dead stop at the phase singularity. And here you have the pattern we've been seeing of the magneto-hydrodynamic vortex.
Radiation, a pencil of radiation carries energy with it, and energy has mass, and therefore a pencil of radiation must exert some attraction on things beside it. What about getting a pencil of radiation curved into a circle so the light goes round and round? Then the attraction it exerts is concentrated as if at the center. So what is it that bends this circle this pencil of radiation into the circle, it's the gravitational attraction of the pencil of radiation itself.
Gravitational
That was
azimuth,
the
John
idea.
Archibald Wheeler, 1954.
Actually, if you think of different possibilities for the size of that geon, bigger or smaller, you find that if it's very big, the energy is low. To push the radiation together requires energy. And you climb a hill like the hill of a volcano until you've come to maximum energy. And then if the pencil of radiation becomes any smaller inside, the energy starts to go down and the thing collapses. So a geon is really an unstable entity. It either blows up into a cloud of radiation traveling away in all directions, or it collapses into a totally collapsed object, something that we today would call a black hole.
Kugelblitz. Ball lightning, the name he gave to a purely electromagnetic. The effect of the fractal toroidal moment on matter changes in all forms of electron interactions. Overexcitement of condensed matter nuclei results in anomalous glowing, transmutation over time. Non-thermal plasticity and material flow. Critical fragmentation, I've got examples of both of those that you can handle today. Production capture of coherent matter waves and collapse of matter waves into different configurations. All electron interactions are affected by the fractal toroidal moment. Casimir forces, modification of the electromagnetic vacuum fluctuations by the presence of boundaries such as conducting plates and dielectric materials. This is the most important one that we're going to come to at the end of this talk, which is going to give you the money shot today, right? Van der Waals, which are kind of nearly that, correlations in the fluctuant polarizations of the polar bonding. This is how you can do large volumes of gas out of HHO, especially with cavitation like a Mars gas, because it produces toroidal moments in the vortexes, and it over-energizes the electrons in those water molecules, and the weak polar bonds just separate. And it doesn't matter whether you've heated your water to boiling temperature, or you've made it a gas by non-thermal means. You end up by having something that's 1,617 times the volume, but with much less energy input. Ionic bonding, covalent bonding, and metallic bonding, allowing things to move. And that is what it does to the electrons. Right, some applications of the toroidal moment: efficient material processing, cutting and grinding, gasification, cold forming and molding, element creation, transformation, including remediation of nuclear waste, release of hidden energy within matter, very, very important, condensed matter conversion into other forms of energy, communication without barriers, transmutation of large power over thin wires, propulsion and shield. I'm going to punch through a lot of slides here now. Okay, first, it has some challenges. This is Dubovik before he died, warning fellow researchers, when you're close to these reactors, it can pull the chi out of your body. And he believes that's what killed Yuri Zhibazhetov, because he was doing tungsten welding rod with water on the meniscus, and he believes that the chi was being sucked out of his body. This is the guy that discovered the toroidal moment. The whole of the next weapons and the whole of future humanity, in my belief, will be based on this, and was in the past. Okay? This is an ancient technology. So non-thermal, blah, 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 blah. These are warnings. You can go and get the presentation. This is a discussion point taken from Hal Puthoff. This is Hal Puthoff, who was speaking to Eric Weinstein. They were talking about how you can go faster than light. They said the only way you can do that is through this phase singularity thing that produces the Aharonov bomb effect, and the Aharonov bomb effect, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, and then you can, and he ignores what he said, and Hal Puthoff immediately says this: it's just a bad cut because they had an argument about remote viewing and whether it's real or not. And he says, and you can go way beyond that. So there is all kinds of toroidal geometries, for example, where you have no electromagnetic fields whatsoever, but you have strong vector and scalar fields. And since you have no Lorentz force in the absence of E and B, then how can you detect them? Well, you can detect them by any kind of quantum detector that can detect phase shifts, can detect vector and scalar potentials like whatever. It's your brain. Your brain can do that. This is his 1993 patent, 9 months after he handed over the Psychic Spy program to Science Applications International Corporation in San Diego, right? You have a coil going one way, and you have a coil going the other way between two electric plates. Oscillate those, what do you get, my friends? You already know the answer. What do you get? You get an anapole, and the anapole is the reduced form of the toroidal moment. It's a special case of the toroidal moment. It is what the elementary LC dipoles are, which are the ether. That is what they call the microleptons in Russia, and that is what everything else is built from, right? Here, 2023, using cognitive tasks in a conscious state, you have, using functional magnetic resonance imaging, as I explained this morning, magnetic vortex, magnetic countervortex. That, my friends, produces a ring loop, which produces a toroidal moment. The brain consciousness works in the same technology. So the guy that was doing the Psychic Spy program, the first patent he puts out is this. A means by which you can do non-electromagnetic communication at any point in the distance without any form of attenuation. And it's also able to manipulate brains. This is your cold electricity, a toroidal moment cluster of electrons in a coherent state traveling along the wire as a guide. Done. It was discovered by Tesla, it was discovered by Russians, developed it quite heavily, and then independently discovered by this guy, Takaaki Matsumoto. He actually observed the ball lightning traveling along and depositing a carbon payload. We'll come on to why it's carbon later. This is a toroidal moment produced by the spin and the anti-spin up in this 1969 waterspout off the coast of Florida. Here are two smoke flares put down by NOAA. They are traveling in this direction, but of course there's an extremely fast wind here. But the wind is traveling in this direction, so is it traveling in this direction there. They are two different pieces of space-time. This is chi, high flux density, that changes the friction there to 0. So this can move at high velocity here, but it does not affect the movement there. I saw this physically in the ultrasonics in 2017. I saw dust particles floating really slowly and completely unaffected by these things shooting through it in the opposite direction. It's so surreal to see. And there's this device called the Windhex, developed by Frank Polivko. I got a patent in 2021. And when someone sent me this, I'd seen it a long time ago on YouTube, I thought, oh my God, I have to look at the patent. It turns out there's the patent for the structure, and it's got a vortex and an anti-vortex. I overlaid the sacred geometry, and what you see on his videos, he puts a piece of an aluminium can up there. 2 seconds later, fine 1 micron dust, which you can pick up with a magnet. What the hell? Aluminium picking up with a magnet? Put glass up there. I put this glass bottle up there. 2 seconds later, comes down as a very fine powder. What? It's because it's going in here and it's going in here. And this is fractal.
Producing colloids?
What?
Is it producing colloids?
No, it depending on how far it's energized,
right,
it'll produce 70 to 270 nanometer sized particles. But the way he had it configured, they were typically an average of 1 micron, which is extremely hard to get. In natural processes and even in normal grinding processes, you tend to get to about 5 micron, it becomes really hard, unless you do sort of electrolysis and colloidal processes like that. So, propulsion. In 1979, my father, who was well into the Navy and was also a very senior Mason, invited me and my 4 siblings downstairs and said, kids, wait there. He looked at his watch and he said, look up into the sky there, and 4 lights went disappeared. And he said, right kids, now you can go to bed. I didn't think about it at all for the rest of my life. I'm 7 years old and I'm looking up in the sky and my dad says, look, oh, okay, so something was going to happen. It was a perfectly clear sky. There was no clouds. It was late summer night, right, 1979. Earlier that year, A.C. Holt had proposed to NASA an intergalactic space drive system, propulsion system, right? In it, he describes from studying unidentified flying objects, and it lists everything that's been revealed in Congress over the last 2.5 years, is literally on that paper you can download from NASA's website on an intergalactic drive propulsion system. And it has, what does it have? It has a current loop, current loop, current loop, current loop, current loop, producing magnetic reconnection and a vortex in the center. That is a toroidal moment structure, which is the propulsion system of any system that you would want to go transstellar, as he was describing. This is the most energetic thing that Ken Scholl has ever found in his research. Produce a ball lightning and put it through a narrow channel with water. Now, in the 1920s, 2 Russians discovered a thing called wire electrodischarge machining. I was looking at the first replication of the Frank Polifica wind hex in Holland, and the guy there was saying, have you ever heard of wire electrodischarge machining? He described it to me, and I said, that has to be working in the same way. Just has to be working the same way, because I had this in my mind as he was describing it with your visual sense, right? And so I went to the company, which happened to be 2 minutes walk around from where I lived in Burgess Hill for 9 years, right? Who had this big video on YouTube that had been seen 2 million times. And I said, look, can I take some video? Right, now what I want you to do is cut. Now you have deionized water, so you have a dielectric barrier. You must not create a spark. It does not work otherwise. It just cuts the wire. You create something below a spark. And I speculated it was producing this coherent matter structure with the boundary, different space-time in there, matter just collapses. Just like I showed you on that copper pipe, which we did before, right? And so I took this image and I said, look, I want you to get some of the wire, give me some fresh wire, and then give me some wire. Now, 90 seconds after I put it in the SEM, I saw this. Scalloped sections taken out, just like you see on this same section from John Hutchison, on these triangular sections that are on the boundary where the monopoles cause it to fracture. You have a pure copper and a pure something else here, with the spirally thing coming down on the carbon on one side. This is the OM, and this is the little curl you get on the OM. The thing that creates everything. That was a ball lightning that was made there, and it just drifted over here and left the matter that was in the body. 1920s. No one knows how it actually works. I've just told you how it works. This structure doing tungsten. This cutting. This is HHO cutting through, and I've seen it cut through twice, even 3 times that amount. When you have the HHO hitting and it produces that extreme hydrodynamic shear, that produces the toroidal structure which coheres the something, which you're going to find out at the end here, into the cores, and that produces a coherent matter wave, a soliton that bores its way down, being fed up its arse by more matter that keeps it coherent and energized. I've seen metal that thick being cut by it. It's just water in there, electrolyzed, but not removing one component from the other. These are practical applications of the fractal toroidal moment. Things that you can go and buy and use today that are using this principle. And people are using them all over the world and they're not dying. What? Yeah. When that's sparking there, it's cut through the entire amount of metal. And it's a really clean, like a laser cut, because it is coherent matter wave. And you only need a small gap and it becomes incoherent and stops cutting. The piece of iron that's just down below, just a little distance below, isn't cut.
It's
Only cutting the top level in the width of the actual nozzle hole. Freaking amazing. No. That's real time. I haven't sped that up. That's how fast it, and it'll do the same with, it doesn't, you can make it thicker, it just keeps on going until it's come out the other side. Now, what happened when I saw that tungsten so-called vaporizing, and I proved it wasn't even getting to the temperature that it was atomizing. What I saw, I brought some hair-thin indium. It was a shim to put on as a heat sink on a laser, right? Melts at 156.6 degrees centigrade. And you know what? We put the same Mars gas jet on it, and what did it do? It glowed as bright as the sun and turned to jelly and didn't drip. What? It's the thickness of a human hair and it's meant to melt at 156.6 degrees C? And then it glowed as bright as a tungsten filament light bulb, a temperature that you might consider at 2005, 600, 700 Kelvin, but it was still not dripping, and it was only the thickness of a human hair. And then it had these jets coming out, and then it melted and fell down. Why? The jets were volcanoes, and out of the volcanoes there was all these different elements. And as soon as you get carbon there, it thermalizes it, thermally heats it, stops being a coherent matter effect, interacting with the electrons, and then that happens. This is a Hutchison effect, and that was, Alec Pizarro went over, it was glowing orange, he turned off the thing, it stopped glowing orange, he went to reach it, he could feel it was colder than the ambient air. Why? Because it's sucking in thermal photons, right? It's pulling photons out of his hand, the monopoles that are in there, and he went to pick it up, and his finger goes in and leaves his fingerprint in the aluminium. This is the same structure, and it re-enters like that. It's exactly and precisely the same structure. This is a cavitation spot on a Mars's vibrator plate. You have carbon on the outside because it's diamagnetic. You have oxygen in the middle, but you have two triangular holes. There's a vortex and an anti-vortex. How have you got triangular holes? Well, because the substructure, which are the three on each side, they're orthogonal, and that's making the triangle. And they've got a little sphere in each corner. Again, the same here, and this is what I was talking about earlier. This is silicon dioxide. On this event horizon, there's nothing inside and there's stuff outside. Because you've got several event horizons. You have an event horizon in here, you have an event horizon here, you have an event horizon here, so on, all the way up to the non-radiating boundary, depending on how it's spun up. This is actually in our reactor. There's several ways to produce this. This is the copper pipe, which was producing the one where I showed you the torus in the middle. Earlier on with the overall structure. The ball lightning builds, this is the torus, this is the tornado going through the tube to the outside of the reactor. Every now and again it fails and it flashes and that goes off and hits the cathode sheath. Right, Afanasyev Dubovik, the mass was done, this was 1998. Inside the torus you have the Aharonov bomb effect. Allows you to phase synchronize matter at any temperature. Now, Tesla. This is his promotional picture in the 1930s to promote the weapon to end all wars. Okay? He's wearing a tie with phi all over it. Okay? Here, he has the vortex and the anti-vortex, one behind the other and one slightly above. Exactly and precisely correct, as you can determine from observing anything in nature. You don't have to be a genius. You just observe anything in nature, right? Stop looking at TikTok or whatever it is, right? Now, watch this. This is another sample. This copper plate was on this iron plate. I asked for him to put it at an angle, so you had all kinds of iron acoustic waves, and it produced exactly the vortex and anti-vortex. Look at how precise it is, and the cone. Matter goes into this part, goes through a wormhole. It raises only the part in here. Only the part, listen to this carefully. Only at this point is it enough to fluidize the metal. Goes through a wormhole, splats through there and deposits all the copper that is ripped from the inside of here. Okay? Now look what Tesla did. That is exactly the Vesica Pisces. That is exactly the center between the yin and the yang. He has 4 structures because he knows you need a minimum of 4. There's even fricking particles hammered into this side and on one side. This is what you call an Easter egg in programming. This is some point in the future, someone's going to work out how I knew what to do, right? And here, at the point where the matter is turned to jelly, i.e. your planes turn to jelly, or your missiles turn to jelly, or your artillery rounds turn to jelly, right? The engines in the planes, or your cars engine vaporizes, or the handles on the car vaporizes, or the glass turns to dust, right? At those points, it has to be here, at this level of spin organization. And he's marked it off, exactly cut. This, my friends, is the Holy Grail. This is what Germany was trying to find in North Africa. This is what the Holy Roman Empire was trying to find in, and it is the God level technology with a little g pretending. Cut off there. And this is on the the Coptic Christian stele in the Coptic Christian Museum. This is the circle of life, but only the living section. It's exactly represented as that. And here is your hydrodynamic fluid vortex. And that's me with Dr. Matsumoto before he died, showing that we had replicated his work. And so this is where you get onto the meat of the business. This is a collapsed structure that's gone onto copper. It has always had an iron-rich crenellated sphere in the core. Why? Iron's ferromagnetic. Round here you have all of the other elements, okay? And then here you have calcium oxide and silicon oxide. Iron oxide, silicon oxide, and calcium oxide. That is almost the entire mass of the Earth, and it's arranged in that way, with a little sprinkling of other elements. This is a planet builder and a sun destroyer. This is Death Star to the max. Why do you hide a technology where you can build galaxies? Why would you hide it? You could go to a piece of empty space, take that 10 to the power 112 and start building solar systems. Come on, why not? It is God power. You understand?
Can I order 2 of those universes that you're going to?
Yeah, it would be nice. So here, I wanted to explain why you only get 48. Why does the integratron in California have 48 points around it? Right? Why did the Sumerian stele have 48 points around that thing? Which, by the way, when you go to the website of the British Museum and you say, what is that structure? They say it's the flying disk of the sky gods. The flying disk of the sky gods. Right? Okay? And it has 48. Why did the Hutchison sample have the 48? Why? Well, first, the triangle. The Sothic triangle is this. I described it, 22 units long, 4 units apart, lift them up, meet in the center. That is always associated with the anchor. This section here is the point of destruction. This is where the ether vortex gets so strong, you're going to hear the punchline later. This is in Matsumoto's book there. This is his black hole, and this is the material he believes is being spewed out of it. It could be being sucked in, as something is happening over here, or it could be spewed out, because what? It goes into a hollow sphere which has a hole at one end. And the matter goes in on the toroidal vortex, and when the overall electrodynamic structure collapses, it comes out the same hole in the vortex as newly synthesized matter. Here is the triangle in the sample I have in my house. It's physically large, it's about this big, Sothic triangle. It has a paisley on the top. When you cut the aluminium in half, this is a Hutchison sample from a long time ago, and it has the triangle of the monopole. So the monopole is up here, these will be synthesized elements. These are the triangles that you see on that sample there. This is in the ultrasound experiment. This is in line on the cracked planes. When the silicon dioxide cracked, it has the triangles on the plane, and this is on the Vega experiment. You either get the spirals or the triangles. It's looking at different places. So, when I had worked all this out, this guy popped up and said, you've been copying my work. I don't know how you did it because I didn't publish it, but you've been copying it. And I said, no, I just looked at stuff under the microscope and it was obvious, right? He was working on sacred geometry and he worked out that this is shrinking at the golden ratio.
Who's this?
Robert Hutchins, there you go, the name's there. There you go, it's on the page. So he was pretty close, but he's off. His model was 3.284% out. Zeiss, which is another person who's written books and done many YouTube videos, this is based off him by a person called Gabby Enzyme. He thinks it's on the boundary of that. But
other people have done that.
I know they have.
Yeah.
The Egyptians and pre-pharaonic people have done it. I'm saying the point. Yeah, but I'm talking about the preciseness. This is not accurate. This is not accurate, but this is my idea of what it is. It's only 1.5373% off the ideal. This one is 3.284. The Zeiss version is 5.883. So I decided to go probably with the actual Sothic triangle, which is what I based mine off, is inaccurate because it's just a tool on the Temple of Osiris in Abydos. As it's written there, how do you make the Sothic triangle? It's a guide for masons. Like, you can't talk about ridiculously different angles. You just say, piece of string, 22, put 2 pegs in 4 units apart, do that, then carve along the line, right? And you're most of the way there. Because depending on the structure's stability, it's actually over a boundary. So all of these things could be right, but the precise one is very precise. Right.
How are you determining the precision?
Because it has to shrink at point. Each one is each sphere that you draw is 0.618 small. Is 0.618 of the size, or 1 over 1.618. Yeah. And here is the vortex coming into the caduceus loop. So the caduceus is often drawn like that, right? Or it's drawn with 2 spirals. That is your spiral coming into the caduceus. That is where this structure, the core, the iron-rich crenellated sphere, is, and that was over there, but it's got material that's spewing out of one side of it. It's newly synthesized material. There is a subcore here, which is coming out of this point here. That has got 2 sub-cores. You can't see them, but that is the thing that comes out and produces the coherent matter wave you saw in the first image on the other presentation, and what you saw burrowing through the tungsten in the other one. And the reason it burrows through instantaneously is there's a higher binding energy than in any ordinary matter. So when it hits ordinary matter, the matter just disintegrates. It can't handle it. Any other matter has got a much lower binding energy. And this is a subcore. There's another subcore here. This one is probably the subcore that was over on this side, and it came and orbited this, like a moon around the Earth. Okay? Now, why is all of this matter here, mostly carbon? Carbon's diamagnetic, it orbits around the electromagnetic structure. I've shown you many examples from physical observation. I'll come back to that. This is your, you need a minimum of 2 to produce a structure. This is on the fractal Tor structure. When you join them together, the outer boundaries overlap when you have 48. The inner boundaries don't overlap. This is the densest matter you can produce. Now, if you add another one in here to make it 49, the structure falls apart. It's the maximum that can possibly be made on each fractal level. It can subdivide into two ball lightnings, and you know what? That's what normal lightning does. It starts off, the ball lightning is made to start ionizing the air, and it gets too much matter in it, and it goes and splits into a fork. And each one of those ball lightnings will have an iron-rich crenellated sphere in the core. And when you go around your drains after a thunderstorm with a magnet, you'll pick up those iron-rich crenellated spheres, which a lot of people think are micrometeorites, because micrometeorites can actually produce the same effect. When it comes into the atmosphere, you've got matter and it's going into plasma and it's going into a magneto-hydrodynamic vortex. It produces the cores which produce iron-rich crenellated spheres, whether or not there was iron in the meteorite or the comet. Whatever it is, it'll still produce them, because iron is special.
Didn't you say also that iron was the terminating element that induces the thermal?
It's the terminating element until you pack a density in here beyond a certain threshold. And then you get every other element in the periodic table. Even elements that do not exist in our near universe. And if you've got time, I'll show you exactly the diagram that you can see in a 760-page book published by a Ukrainian in 2007 by equipment that was in the former Soviet isotopic laboratory out on the outskirts of Kyiv, and was transferred in 2015 with 4 million that came from somewhere, verified by the guy that founded the Fusion Technology Journal in Illinois, and then the Proton Scientific site that was promoting this test disappeared from the internet, and it was transferred to Brookhaven National Laboratory and has become part of the fusion program. What I'm showing you is how nature works. You have to deal with it, right? It works on every level. So these, we can see that this is isolated here. The inner n-1 core is thought to be less able to be compressed or distorted. From the experiments, we know that the n-1 Tor structures are distorted as more are present because these are field structures. And so this doesn't get distorted, but these do. And this is the point at which even the outer structure that confines these intersects with the inner structure. So it has to be this shape. It can only get to 48. You do not need any maths to do this. You just need a bit of geometry, and all of it is sacred geometry. All of it is sacred geometry. Right, one last slide, and then I'll give you the punchline today. One last presentation, if we have time.
So like iron is the gateway element. In a sense.
Iron is like, keep piling up, keep more iron, more iron, more iron, more iron, more iron. Okay, I cannot fit.
Yep.
I've got iron 100% in here.
Yep.
Right? Now,
Saturated.
it's totally saturated.
Yep.
And it isn't actually iron at that point, by the way.
Okay, but the number of photons.
When the field
number
structure
of
collapses,
photons.
the coherent matter that comes out
Yeah.
becomes iron.
Yeah.
But when you pile more matter into that space, and the field collapses that is confining it, it then comes out and it forms other elements. It's no element when it's in the core, and you're going to find out what it is in a few minutes, right? So the toroidal moment comes out here, but it's fractal. So you have this is the non-radiating boundary, or sorry, rather, this is the apple on this structure, and the apple precisely intersects with the central core's inner boundary. Just from sacred geometry, you end up with the same structure here. And by the way, the matter, if you can see what you're seeing here, wheel within wheel within wheel. The reason a tornado goes around like that, and it has a tor and a subtor, is because in the tor and the subtor there's these things, and they cause the flow pattern. So in here, you've got a twist, and that twists around here, and this then twists around here, and then this twists around here, and that produces your tornado. No one can really explain the twist, but it's because of the electromagnetics. I've already shown you that, I've already shown you that. Here, I'm going to show you nature. The yin-yang. A leaf from the side of the hillside but at Delphi. Noticed by my child. She says, Daddy, it's the structure. Because she was able to draw this freehand at 3, right? Here, that's probably not deep structure, that's a different one. Is it stopped again?
No, it's his daughter, probably.
No, it's not. It's a different Indian. Tutankhamun. This is a Dinaric skull, the race of which Tesla was. It's the most perfect fit to the sacred geometry. Go figure. Because the people, he comes from the region in Macedonia, they had 6 foot tall was the average height, he was 6'2". And that region has their coins with the ball lightning structure on them, which is the same structure as this. And the Coptic Christians knew the science because they were entrusted with it along with the Knights Templar. And it went through to the Orthodox Christian Church, and his father was an Orthodox Christian priest. Okay? Yeonmi Park, random person. The mouth is exactly in here. The bottom of this point of the Vesica Pisces is on the sputum, and the third eye, when you draw it, is exactly in the correct place. So this came out of the nuclear testing program. Vortex, anti-vortex, flux. This is the overall cloverleaf pattern. That's why you got this. That's why you got that. So, how? The universe is a wide condensate of relic neutrinos. I've talked about that. It shares one wave function. The cosmic neutrino background is at 1.95 Kelvin. Fractal toroidal clusters thereof are chi. So this isn't chi. The chi is the clusters of those. And low and medium energy ones are in the environment called static electricity. I won't do it to you, but I can get 500 PhD people in a room and I can say, what is static electricity? And no one has a freaking clue. They don't have a clue. They say, I've got charge over here and it discharges to over here. You're describing what it does. You're not describing what is static electricity, because electrons, they've got the Pauli exclusion principle. How are they all joining up into a bunch, right? Well, they're joining up in a bunch because they lose that exclusion principle because of these structures that make these coherent matter. All matter, ordinary vacuum objects like a proton, electron, a neutrino, etc., chi, and exotic vacuum objects, which is a name given to by Ken Scholes, pulls relic neutrinos through their core, and it produces a spin wave. That is the actual spin of nuclei that comes out of the top, right? And that is a gravitational beam as well. And we've got videos of these things. You've got one coming out of a ball of lightning, and it goes over here, and it bounces around here, and another one comes out, and it starts orbiting around it, and then another one comes out, and you've got 3 of these structures orbiting around the common center of mass. It's freaking amazing to see. You see them coming in this direction, and in the forward direction, you've got a beam that one of them is coming over here, and it starts orbiting around once it comes into the event horizon of the spin wave that's coming out of the front of the structure up here, in front of its forward motion of direction. It doesn't care about the electric field or the magnetic field in the system. It only cares about these things because they've got no electromagnetics coming out here. It only cares about the toroidal moment and the gravitational beam that comes out of the front.
You got 5 minutes.
Okay, good. That's fine. So always associated below the loop is the heat to all hidden technology. That is the Sothic triangle. According to the Egyptians, this is the breath of life, the chi and the prana. So the clusters that this makes are the chi and the prana, right? Okay, so here's some examples. This is on the line reactor. Vortex, anti-vortex, one on top of the other with fractal structure. It forms a hexagon on the back, and you can see the flux loop of the synthesized material between the 2 halves, embedded into the fused quartz. Come on. Never lets me go past that one. Come on. You're going to have to watch it again. Okay, so what is happening? John Archibald Wheeler said that if you can get energy to focus into a single point without loss, you can make what's called a Kugelblitz, a ball lightning, is the name that he gave it, which is a pure electromagnetic black hole. Okay? When you get the black hole, and it needs to be small, because if you have a big black hole, on the boundary, the magnetic field is very weak. But if you have a very small magnetic ball lightning, which you keep feeding with chi, and you keep feeding with matter and electrons, it will sustain it over and above its Hawking radiation. It'll maintain its stability. Keep feeding it, its magnetic field. When the magnetic field exceeds 10 to the 15 Tesla, it starts removing photons from the vacuum. And it will remove it to a point where ordinary baryons fall apart. What am I essentially saying here? Well, firstly, this was in the Schwerblis and paper. When you get the 2 electromagnetic phantoms sufficiently energized, it will cause positron and electrons forming and their annihilation to capture the photons. So it captures vacuum fluctuation energy. It starts building itself, self-sustaining. And then secondly, Freiberger in 2009 did a similar treatment and said it causes the critical duality angle leads to the decay of baryons. What does that produce? When you decay a baryon, what does it produce? Anyone know? Gluons and quarks. Gluons and quarks. Why is that important? Because before the birth of hadrons, which are things like mesons, which have just got 2 quarks, and before baryons, which are neutrons and protons, there was quarks and gluons. And this is pre-matter, prima materia. This is the birth of the universe. Go and look at it up on quark-gluon plasma. Quark-gluon plasma. The quark-gluon plasma is formed because the baryons decay. They come in through that vortex and they become the same pattern as the electron vortex, but now it's much more powerful. The single nuclei, which are light, takes a femtosecond to travel across that proton, right? It's so small. Now becomes a much more inflated quark-gluon plasma. It's a coherent condensate of that plasma, and it's in the pattern of the magneto-hydrodynamic vortex that formed it. And it's much more powerful. These have been seen by electrodischarge through water flow in Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. They do a 2000 volt discharge with a 200 volt bias onto a metal plate, and you see these toroidal plasmas moving around on a piece of metal glowing for 2 days. How is that even possible? When I published and made that paper, gave it some, like exposure, a military guy in the US reached out to me and he said, this used to happen when we used free electron laser beams to harden aluminium. It took me 40 minutes to cut the end off that with a new hacksaw. When I looked at the elements under XRF, it did not test as any elements. There was no elements that gave the X-ray out of that. It is harder. The material has been like that. That's why it doesn't ring like aluminium. It's high frequency. It's hard. And so he said this was a classified technology at the time to harden gear for landing equipment. And he says, we saw these glowing spots on there. And he contacted his retired colleague who had also seen these glowing spots. I said, did you ever investigate that? He said, yeah. He said, well, how long did they last? I said, what did you do with them? Oh, we got a wire brush and brushed them off. And then we put them on the aircraft, right? And then they said, well, did you ever investigate? He said, how long did they last? And they said, 2 months. A glowing plasma structure. This is what Sviatomenko says in his book. He says in his book, in 2007, he says, this material is a quark-gluon plasma plasmoid, a quark-gluon plasma toroid. And it's fractal. Itself is stable. It's a new form of matter. Now, what happens when the electrodynamic structure collapses? All of that quark-gluon plasma, which is a proto-new universe, gets deconfined, comes out of its much lower vacuum pressure, and is reborn as a range of new nuclei. So, you have such a field, and it doesn't just turn atoms, it's a progression of things. Everyone thinks that if I've got a aluminium atom, that I take the binding energy of that and you divide it by the nucleons, and that's the binding energy per nucleon. Bullshit! Because it isn't just a sphere of nucleons. It's got structure. You've got a bit of a, I've shown you, you take aluminium, it rips oxygen off and leaves boron. So you can already see that it can easily be split from boron and oxygen. So it's called cluster decay. The energy, binding energy, is not equally split between every nucleon in that nuclei. It has weak spots and the matter falls apart. And one of those weak spots is alpha particles. And another weak spot is carbon. It's a very weak spot. And so when you see all of that structure that I showed you earlier, with carbon in there, and I have to show you these, God. Okay, I'll show you this. Where are we? Okay. When you see all that carbon coming up on the side of the wire electrodischarge machining, or you see it on the ball lightning, or you see it on the Amasa gas, that carbon is literally being ripped off as cluster decay. It goes into the mix, and some of it goes into the cores, and it can build up. And if you build up to a certain point, in Sviatomenko's book, it shows it goes ion, and all the way up to 555 AMU, which doesn't exist in our near universe. Stable nuclei.
You said 555?
Way beyond any nuclei that exists on Earth or near universe. They synthesized it, and it was stable. And also, he saw structures where they were firing the primary ions at them, and they weren't seeing any secondary ions. So they turned off the photomultiplier, switched off the machine, and on the phosphor, they could see a glow, which exponentially decayed. They thought, what? And then they turned it on again. They go, oh, we're not even seeing the primary ions. This is meant to slash into your sample, throw off a load of atoms, goes through a drift tube, and you can see what atoms are there. They saw no atoms, not even the things that they were firing in. But when they did this 12 times and turned off the tube, they saw a glowing thing. That's Hawking radiation. The matter was being captured by a black hole. And he calls it a black hole. And it has self-similar structures around the boundary. He describes this in 2006. And in there, the same thing happens. So you have a big one in the middle, and you have substructures which also have an area which will eat ions.